Hello, everybody. My name is Mr. Wilson, and today I'm going to be going over the characterization annotation, and we're going to be using the most dangerous game as our model text. So hopefully you've gone over a few of these terms already in class. We'll just review them very quickly. The STEAL acronym, let's take a look at that really quickly. Where we look at indirect characterization, things that are not obvious, but you can interpret the text so that you can understand what is happening with that character. For instance, you can look at their speech, their thought, their effect on other people, their actions and their looks. All those things let us know things about the character. We'll also be looking at direct versus indirect characterization, mostly indirect characterization today. External versus internal conflict, static versus dynamic characters, character motivation, and the protagonist versus the antagonist. So let's look at our most dangerous game. Here we are. Sometimes you might see someone and you might say, oh, you know, that person is a really shallow person. They're just really superficial and I don't like them. On the flip side of that, we can also judge someone pretty superficially as well. So that is something we're trying to avoid here. One of the reasons we do annotation of characterization is we don't want that superficial, surface level interpretation of the characters. We want to go a little bit deeper. Okay, so just like the previous annotation, on the left side, we're going to identify the author's strategy or the literary element. So that's where we'll identify STEAL, indirect characterization, internal conflict, static versus dynamic, all that. And then we're going to look on the right-hand side what the author is actually doing and what the results are. And again, we'll start with our author, we'll have our verb, and then we'll have the explanation after that. So let's get started. The most dangerous game. We're going to be particularly looking at the characters of Rainsford and General Zaroff. So the very first part of the story all starts with dialogue. We don't really get any kind of scene setup. We don't really know what the boat is on that they're riding on. We don't know what things look like. We don't even know what Rainsford looks like. At no point in the story do we know what Rainsford really looks like. So, but we are finding out about the character. So through indirect characterization, through speech, so remember our STEAL here, S stands for speech, we're learning a lot about these characters. So I highlighted, "You've good eyes," said Whitney with a laugh, "and I've seen you pick off a moose moving in the brown fall bush at 400 yards. And then later on he says, "Great sport, hunting." And Rainsford agrees, "The best sport in the world." So through that, we reveal that Rainsford and Whitney are hunters. We also get a sense that Rainsford's probably pretty good. He's the one with the good eyes. He's picked off a moose moving in the brown fall bush at 400 yards. Requires some skill. So we get a sense that he's probably a pretty good hunter. They go on to have this conversation about the feelings that the jaguar might have. So Rainsford says, "Who cares about how a jaguar feels?" And Whitney replies, "Perhaps the jaguar does." At which point Rainsford scoffs and says, "Bah, they've no understanding." And finally, Whitney says, "Even so, I rather think they understand one thing, the fear of pain and the fear of death." We're already getting an idea that Whitney is a little more empathetic about the animals and where they are coming from. Whereas Whitney doesn't care. Feels like, whatever, they're animals, doesn't matter what they feel like. And then he says, "The world is made up of two classes, the hunters and the huntees. Luckily, you and I are hunters." Later on, we'll be learning about irony, and you'll see that there's definitely a point of irony in that. But right now, as we're reading it, what we're finding out about Rainsford is he's pretty cynical. He has not a very generous view of the world. There's two classes, the hunters and the huntees. We're the hunters. Therefore, everything else is what we get to hunt. Not a very happy view of the world. So already from this dialogue, from this speech, we're finding out a lot about these characters. So you're going to want to highlight these particular areas, and you're going to want to look at that this is indirect characterization and what the author is doing. And what all this does for us is when we later on have to write a paper, for instance, and we are told what is the difference between Rainsford and Whitney's atmosphere or attitude towards the animals. We can immediately go to this part. We know that we're getting some indirect characterization through speech. We know the direct quotes, so we already have our evidence highlighted, and then we have notes over here that's already helping us analyze some of that evidence. All right, further on, again, this is pure speech. Pure imagination, said Rainsford, one superstitious tailor can take the whole ship's company with his fear. So again, the author is showing us Rainsford is a skeptic. He doesn't really believe in superstition. And he's fairly fearless. He's not worried about this island that's in the dark. We're not supposed to go near. Okay, then moving on. So he falls off the ship. He ends up on this island that everyone is so worried about. And we get some of his thoughts and actions. And through those thoughts and actions, we know that the author is portraying Rainsford as level-headed and calm. Okay, level-headed and calm. You can go ahead and pause this because you're going to try and find those specific quotes. So you'll either underline if you have paper, or if you're on your computer, you'll highlight the actual quotes that show the thoughts and actions that portray Rainsford as level-headed and calm. Okay, while you're doing that, I'm going to fix this grammatically. All right. So you can pause it, and then I'll be right here when you come back. We're going to scroll on down. Now we have some more indirect characterization. Now we're going to be looking at the effect that a character has. So we've met Zaroff, and he says, in a cultivated voice marked by a slight accent that gave it added precision and deliberateness, he says, "It is a very great pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Sanger Rainsford, the celebrated hunter, to my home." Okay, you just learned indirectly that I have a very terrible Russian accent. However, what this is telling us indirectly, the effect on the character is Rainsford is so famous that other people know about him. Okay, so through Zaroff's speech, we know that Rainsford is a pretty renowned hunter to the point that people who have never met him know who he is. So that's showing the effect that Rainsford has on other characters. He's renowned. Other people know about him. Well, let's look at some looks. The L in Steele stands for looks, and Zaroff has high cheekbones, a sharp cut nose, a spare dark face, the face of a man used to giving orders, the face of an aristocrat. And we know that that means Zaroff is probably fairly serious and sophisticated based on his looks. Again, looks. The dining room to which Ivan conducted him was in many ways remarkable. There was a medieval magnificence about it. It suggested a baronial hall of feudal times with its oaken panels, its high ceilings, its vast refectory tables where 200 men could sit down and eat. About the hall were mounted heads of many animals: lions, tigers, elephants, moose, bears, larger or more perfect specimens Rainsford had never seen. So again, the looks aren't necessarily based on the character, but the looks are based on the dining room. And from what we see in the dining room, we know that Zaroff is probably a pretty rich experience. All right. Later on, Zaroff says, "I live for danger, Mr. Rainsford." So what is that? He says, "I live for danger, Mr. Rainsford." In Steele, Which of those steel is that? And then what is the author telling us with that? So go ahead and pause the video and fill out these two boxes to let us know what's the literary element being used, write that over here, and then what is the author showing us or telling us over here. Okay, after you've paused that, come back, let's look at the next thing. He says, Zaroff says, hunting was beginning to bore, and hunting, remember, had been my life. So we have character motivation here. Connell is suggesting that Zaroff's motivation is to hunt humans. Why? Well, he's been a pretty good hunter most of his life, and now animals cease to amuse him. Now he needs bigger game, smarter game, more challenging game. Okay, so we get some character motivation there. We get some external conflict, a protagonist versus an antagonist. So this is the moment right here when Rainsford figures out that General Zaroff is hunting humans. So that's what all this highlighted area means. So immediately at that point, we've really established a protagonist and an antagonist. Rainsford is our protagonist because that's who we've been following throughout the story. And we now have a villain for Rainsford to deal with in General Zaroff. Now we have some more indirect characterization through speech. So Rainsford interrupts Zaroff. Zaroff's talking about, well, you were in the war, so therefore, and Rainsford says, well, that does not make me condone cold-blooded murder. So what does that tell us about Rainsford? What is Connell revealing about Rainsford through this piece of dialogue here? Okay. Before Rainsford, we may not felt very sure about him. He didn't seem to care about animals. He was, he believed that there's either hunters or the huntees in the world. What is this particular statement? How does that add some depth to his character? You can go ahead and pause and fill in this box. All right, hopefully you're back. I hunt, so this is Zaroff again. I hunt the scum of the earth. Sailors from tramp ships, lassers, blacks, Chinese, whites, mongrels. A thoroughbred horse or hound is worth more than the score of them. Well, you know, he doesn't seem to have a very good attitude towards humans. He's kind of equal opportunity. He mentions a lot of different races here. He uses some racist language in the words mongrels, but overall, if he feels like you're not worth much, you're the scum of the earth and worth hunting. We learn that through his. So again, the author is deepening Zaroff's character here by letting us know what his overall attitude is toward humans. Okay, now we have some internal conflict. His whole idea at first was to put distance between himself and General Zaroff. And to this end, he had plunged along, spurred on by the sharp rowers of something very like panic. Now he got a grip on himself, had stopped, was taking stock of himself in this situation. So yes, we have some external conflict going on. He's trying to get away from Zaroff, so Zaroff wants to kill him. But now he is having some internal conflict. How is he going to survive? What is he going to do? At first, he's just like, I'm going to run. I'm going to try to get as far away as possible. But then he stops and starts to think about it. And that shows some internal conflict about how is he going to deal with this situation? Should I just run? Or should I think through things a little bit more? Now we show Rainsford as a more dynamic character. He changes in the story. After being hunted, Rainsford knew now how an animal at bay feels. Now Rainsford is a little more empathetic towards the hunted animal. Now his cynical view, there's the hunter and there's the huntee. Well, now he's become the huntee. What does that mean? That has changed him. He's a little more understanding of what it might mean to be the huntee, maybe a little less dismissive about those who get hunted. All right, then after Rainsford jumps into the sea and the general feels like he's probably won the hunt, didn't actually capture his prey, but he at least has won because Rainsford has jumped into the sea. He hasn't changed much. You know, he comes home, stares out at the sea, shrugs a little, sits down, drinks some brandy, lights a cigarette, hums an opera. Okay, hasn't changed much. He's had this big confrontation with Rainsford and really hasn't really changed. He's just still Zaroff, the old Zaroff that we've always known. And then finally, we have another dynamic characterization moment where Rainsford doesn't smile. He says, "I'm still a beast at bay." He says in a low, hoarse voice, "Get ready, General Zaroff." And this makes him a little bit more animalistic. He has this low, hoarse voice. He says, "I'm a beast at bay," and he's ready to fight the general. Okay, making him seem more like a beast, more animalistic. Okay, so he has changed throughout the story. All right, so that is an example of how we would go about annotating the Most Dangerous Game. I hope you've kept with me. I hope you were following along and annotating with me and filling in some of the squares. And now you're going to be doing it for the next story. Good luck and see you next time.